Have you ever watched a kingdom burn while you were too weak to hold a bucket of water? The silence of the VIP suite in the St. Jude Medical Center was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and thick with the impending collapse of an empire that had taken 30 years to build. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the penthouse window, blurring the city lights of Seoul into streaks of gray and weeping neon, a visual echo of the chaos currently tearing through the invisible digital veins of the underworld. In the center of the room, amidst the rhythmic indifference of heart monitors and the sterile scent of antiseptic, lay Jae-sung, a man whose name alone usually commanded armies, silenced prosecutors, and moved markets. But tonight, Jae-sung was not a king. He was a patient, bound by wires, his body betraying him just as his digital fortress began to crumble. On the bedside table, his encrypted smartphone vibrated incessantly, a glowing harbinger of doom that he physically could not reach. The screen flashed red, a silent scream indicating a level 5 breach. The firewall, which had cost millions to construct and was rumored to be impenetrable, was dissolving like sugar in hot water. Standing in the corner of the room, almost invisible against the shadows, was Brianna. She wore simple green nurse scrubs that seemed almost too bright for the somber atmosphere of the room, a splash of life in a chamber of imminent death. She was adjusting the dosage on a digital infusion pump, her movements precise, practiced, and calm. To the men who guarded the door outside, and perhaps even to Jae-sung himself in his semi-conscious state, she was part of the furniture, a functionary, a necessity, a background detail with no agency in the world of high-stakes power. But appearances are the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves. Brianna paused, her dark eyes shifting from the medical display to the vibrating phone on the table. She didn't flinch at the flashing red alerts. She studied them. There was a sharpness in her gaze that contradicted the submissive posture expected of her role. She saw the pattern of the notifications, the specific frequency of the vibration, and the terrified urgency of the device. She knew exactly what was happening, not because she was told, but because she recognized the anatomy of a digital slaughter. The room felt cold, but the heat coming from the servers miles away, servers currently being gutted of their secrets, would be enough to burn down a city. Jae-sung stirred, a groan of frustration escaping his lips as he tried to lift a hand heavy with sedation, his fingers twitching toward the phone that held his life's work. The vibration of the phone was a physical assault on Jae-sung's senses as he clawed his way back to full consciousness, the fog of anesthesia retreating only to be replaced by the sharp, jagged edges of panic. He was a man who lived by control, control of territory, control of information, control of fear, and now, strapped to a bed with the erratic arrhythmia, he possessed none of it. He gasped, his chest heaving against the leads of the EKG, the monitor spiking in a frantic staccato that mirrored the terror rising in his throat. He managed to turn his head, his eyes locking onto the glowing screen. The red protocol had failed. The realization hit him with the force of a bullet. The intricate web of blackmail, the ledgers of illicit trade, the identities of corrupt officials, and the location of safe houses were all being siphoned out. It wasn't just theft, it was an eviction. Someone wasn't just stealing his money, they were deleting his existence. He tried to sit up, a roar of command dying in his throat, emerging only as a ragged cough. The pain in his chest was a blinding white light, forcing him back against the pillows, sweat beading instantly on his forehead. Brianna moved before the monitor could trigger the station alarm. She was at his side in a single, fluid motion, her hand firm but gentle on his shoulder, pushing him back down. "You need to lie still," she said, her voice a low, measured contralto that cut through the panic in the room. It wasn't a request, it was an order, delivered with an authority that surprised him. Jae-sung looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. He saw a black woman in green scrubs, her face composed, her expression unreadable, showing neither pity nor fear. "My phone," he rasped, the English feeling clumsy in his mouth, though he spoke it perfectly. "Give me." The phone. Brianna glanced at the device, which was now scrolling through lines of code, a terminal window open where a lock screen should have been. She didn't hand it to him. Instead, She checked his pulse, her fingers cool against his feverish skin. Your heart rate is 160. If I give you that phone, you will go into cardiac arrest, and then it won't matter what's on the screen, she stated, her tone devoid of the trembling deference he was used to from hospital staff. Let it ring, Jae-sung stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief and rage. You don't understand, he hissed, the monitor beeping faster. Everything is leaving. Brianna paused, her hand hovering over the 4-line. She looked him dead in the eye, the silence stretching between them. I know, she said softly. It's a lateral escalation attack. They aren't just taking the data, they're overriding the backups simultaneously. If you touch that phone, you trigger the final deletion. The door to the suite burst open, shattering the tense quiet. 3 men in soaking wet dark suits stormed in, bringing the smell of rain, ozone, and desperation with them. Leading them was Kyung-ho, Jae-sung's second-in-command and closest confidant, though at this moment, he looked like a man walking to the gallows. His usually immaculate hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes darted wildly around the room before landing on his boss. Sir. Kyung-ho choked out, ignoring the nurse completely as he rushed to the bedside, placing a sleek, silver laptop on the over-bed table. They bypassed the proxy. The kill switch isn't working. We're locked out of the mainframe. Every time we try to cut the connection, they mirror the server. The other 2 men stood by the door, hands hovering near their holsters, useless weapons against an enemy that existed in the ether. The laptop screen cast a harsh blue glow on Jae-sung's pale face as he stared at the cascading red text. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. Brianna stepped back, retreating into the shadows near the window, but she did not leave. She watched the screen from a distance, her eyes narrowing as she tracked the flow of the code. The men were frantic, their fingers mashing keys, shouting commands into radios that only returned static. They were soldiers trying to fight a ghost. They understood violence, intimidation, and logistics, but they were drowning in a sea of algorithms. Cut the power to the server farm, Jae-sung commanded, his voice gaining strength from pure adrenaline. Burn it down if you have to. Kyung-ho shook his head, his hands trembling. We can't. The malware is embedded in the cooling system controls. If we cut power, the backup generators surge and fry the hard drives. We lose everything anyway. It's a trap, sir. They want us to pull the plug. The room plunged into a suffocating despair. The Empire was evaporating second by second. From her vantage point, Brianna saw the specific syntax of the attack. It was elegant, vicious, and painfully familiar. She saw the crude attempts Kyung-ho was making to patch the breach, typing commands that were only accelerating the data loss. She adjusted her green scrubs, took a breath that expanded her ribs against the fabric, and made a choice. The anonymity of the nurse was safe, but the patient was dying, not medically but existentially. And Brianna had taken an oath to save lives, even if it meant revealing the life she had left behind. Stop typing. Brianna's voice rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the chaotic shouting of the men. The room froze. Kyung-ho spun around, his face twisting in confusion and anger, as if a chair had suddenly started speaking. Get out, he snapped, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. This is private. Leave. Now, he turned back to the screen, his finger hovering over the Enter key. If you press that, Brianna continued, stepping out of the shadows and walking toward the bed with a stride that was entirely military, you will execute the embedded script and send your entire encrypted ledger directly to Interpol. It's a bait command. Jae-sung looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes narrowing. The monitor behind him beeped steadily, his heart rate dropping slightly as curiosity overrode panic. Who are you? He asked, his voice low. Brianna didn't answer him directly. She walked past the armed guards who were too stunned to stop her, and stood next to Kyung-ho. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. The set of her jaw, the intensity of her focus, the way she assessed the screen, it was the posture of a predator entering familiar hunting grounds. I'm the person telling you that you are bleeding out, she said, looking down at the laptop. And he is using a tourniquet around your neck. She gestured to Kyung-ho's hands. You're trying to firewall the external ports. The attack isn't coming from outside. It's tunneling through your own VPN. Every time you block a port, you open 2 more for the intruder. Kyung-ho bristled, his pride wounded, but he hesitated. He looked at Jae-sung for a command. The boss looked at the woman in the green scrubs, a woman he had ignored for 3 days, a woman whose name he didn't know. He saw the intelligence burning in her eyes, a sharp contrast to the panic in his men's. He saw a gamble. And Jae-sung was a gambling man. Let her see, Jae-sung ordered, the command weak but absolute. Kyung-ho stepped back, stunned, relinquishing the machine. Brianna didn't sit. She stood over the laptop, her fingers hovering for a split second over the keys, a pianist preparing for a concerto. The sound of typing that followed was different. It wasn't the frantic, heavy-handed smashing that Kyung-ho had produced. It was a rapid, rhythmic, fluid cascade of sound, the sound of water rushing over stones. Brianna's fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes darting across the multiple windows she threw open. Terminal access. Rerouting through the subnet. Isolating the ghost protocol, she muttered, mostly to herself, her voice dropping into a register of pure focus. On the screen, the wall of red text hesitated. The scrolling slowed. He's good, she said, her voice tight. He's using a hydro worm. Cut 1 head, 2 grow back. So we don't cut the head. We starve the body. She typed a complex string of command lines, her hands a blur of motion. The pain in his chest seemed to recede, replaced by the awe of watching a master at work. He realized, with a jolt of shock, that the woman saving his life wasn't the surgeon who had operated on his heart, but the nurse who was currently rewriting the architecture of his digital defense. You're not a nurse, he whispered, the realization dawning on him. Brianna didn't look up, her eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen, the green of her scrubs now looking like camouflage in this digital jungle. I am a nurse, she corrected, executing a command that caused the screen to flash white, then settle into a stable amber glow. But before I fixed bodies, I broke systems. 6 years in Cyber Command. Intelligence Division. She hit the final key with a definitive snap. The red alerts vanished. The scrolling stopped. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The bleed has stopped, she said, straightening up and finally exhaling, the tension leaving her shoulders. She turned to face Jae-sung, her expression softening back into professional detachment. But they're still inside the perimeter. I bought you 20 minutes. That's it. 20 minutes was a lifetime in the world of high-frequency trading, but in the underworld, it was merely a countdown to an execution. The silence in the hospital suite had shattered, replaced by the frantic, controlled chaos of an evacuation. Jae-sung, a man who had been knocking on death's door moments prior, was now ripping sensors from his chest with a grim determination that defied medical logic. The adhesive pads tore away from his skin, leaving angry red welts, but the pain seemed to ground him, pulling him out of the narcotic haze and back into the sharp, jagged reality of survival. We leave, he commanded, his voice raspy but infused with the iron will that had built his syndicate. Kyung-ho was already shouting into his earpiece, coordinating the extraction, his eyes darting to the windows as if expecting a sniper's bullet to shatter the glass at any second. Brianna stood amidst the whirlwind, her green scrubs starkly out of place among the dark, tailored suits of the guards who flooded the room. She wasn't cowering, she was calculating. She watched Jae-sung stumble as his feet hit the floor, his knees buckling under the weight of his own ambition. Without a word, she moved into his space, not as a subordinate, but as a crutch, wedging her shoulder under his arm to bear his weight. If you walk out of here, you risk a thrombus detachment, she stated flatly, her voice cutting through the noise. But if you stay, you lose everything. I assume you've made your choice. Jae-sung looked down at her, sweat beading on his pale forehead, his eyes dark with pain and adrenaline. The car, he gritted out. Get us to the tower. The journey from the sterile safety of St. Jude's to the armored interior of the waiting limousine was a blur of rain, flashing lights, and the metallic taste of fear. The city of Seoul wept around them, a deluge of water washing over the black sedan as it tore through the slick streets, the tires screaming in protest. Inside the car, the air was thick with tension. Jae-sung sat slumped against the leather, clutching his chest, while Brianna monitored his pulse with 2 fingers pressed against his carotid artery, her other hand gripping the handle above the door as the driver swerved to avoid a blockade. She was no longer just a nurse. She was the lifeline keeping the king alive long enough to reach his castle. The tower, Jae-sung's headquarters, was not merely a building. It was a fortress disguised as a skyscraper, a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the rainy night sky like a black needle. The limousine screeched into the underground garage, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like a dying scream. The transition from the chaotic streets to the subterranean bunker was jarring. Here, the air was cool, recycled, and smelled of ozone and oil. Guards with assault rifles stood at attention, their faces masked by shadows, as the entourage spilled out of the vehicle. Jae-sung pushed himself away from the car, straightening his spine with an agonizing effort. He refused to be carried into his own kingdom. He walked, haltingly, toward the private elevator, Brianna matching his pace, her eyes scanning the perimeter with the practiced paranoia of a veteran. The elevator ride was a silent ascent into the clouds, the numbers flickering upward as the pressure built in their ears. When the doors finally slid open, they revealed a sprawling command center that looked less like an office and more like the bridge of a warship. Walls of monitors bathed the room in a cold, blue light, displaying live feeds of shipping containers, stock tickers, and surveillance grids. But tonight, the screens were flashing with error messages, the digital rot spreading like gangrene across the displays. In the center of the room stood the main terminal, a sleek, isolated console that served as the brain of the operation. Kyung-ho rushed to it, typing furiously, but his face was a mask of defeat. "It's bypassing the air gap," he yelled, his voice cracking. "They're using the dormant accounts to escalate privileges." "Sir, there in the vault wasn't physical. It was the encrypted sector where the blackmail material, the leverage Jae-sung held over judges, politicians, and rivals, was stored. If that opened, the Korean underworld would implode, and Jae-sung would be buried in the rubble." Brianna didn't wait for permission. She walked past the stunned guards, past the trembling Kyung-ho, and shoved the rolling leather chair aside with her hip. She stood before the main terminal, her hands hovering over the backlit mechanical keyboard. The interface was sophisticated, a custom Unix-based kernel that would have baffled an average IT specialist, but Brianna looked at it with the familiarity of a painter viewing a canvas. "Get me a localized root shell," she ordered, not looking back. Kyung-ho stared at her, paralyzed by the audacity. "Who do you think you are commanding?" he snarled, stepping forward. "Do it." Jae-sung's voice cracked like a whip from the doorway, where he leaned heavily against the frame. "Give her the keys, Kyung-ho, or I will bury you with the servers." The second-in-command flinched, the color draining from his face, and he hastily typed a string of administrative overrides before stepping back, hands raised in surrender. Brianna sat down, the green of her scrubs reflecting the cascading code on the massive screens. She cracked her knuckles, a human sound in a room of machines, and began to type. This was not the frantic pecking of a desperate man. It was the symphonic destruction of a barrier. She wasn't just blocking the attack. She was dissecting it. "This isn't a script, Kitty," she murmured, her eyes darting across 3 different monitors. "This is state-sponsored architecture. Someone paid a lot of money for this weapon." She executed a command, and the room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat, the screens flickering out before roaring back to life in a harsh, amber monochrome. "I've severed the external uplinks," she announced, her voice calm amidst the storm. "We are now trapped in here with them. It's a cage match. No data goes out, but nothing comes in to help us either." The atmosphere in the room shifted from panic to a suffocating suspense. The only sound was the rhythmic clatter of the keyboard and the ragged breathing of Jae-sung, who had collapsed into a chair nearby, watching the woman in green dismantle his destruction. On the main screen, a digital map of the network appeared, showing the intruder as a pulsing red vein seeking to infect the core. Brianna was the blue wall, constantly shifting, parrying, and redirecting the flow. "They're adapting," she said, her brow furrowing. "They've realized the connection is cut. They're initializing a logic bomb. If they can't steal it, they'll wipe it." The red vein on the screen expanded, branching out like lightning. "Kyung-ho, I need you to manually override the cooling fans on racks 4 through 8, Brianna commanded, her fingers never leaving the keys. "Create a thermal throttle. Slow down the processor's speed." Kyung-ho hesitated only for a fraction of a second before sprinting toward the server room door. The hierarchy had dissolved. Competence was the new currency, and Brianna was the richest person in the room. "Why are you doing this?" Jae-sung asked quietly, the question hanging heavy in the cool air. He watched her profile, illuminated by the amber glow. She was saving a monster, and she knew it. "Because I took an oath to preserve life," she said, her eyes locked on the code. "And right now your life is tied to this machine. If this system dies, the people coming for you won't leave witnesses. I'm not doing this for your empire, Jae-sung. I'm doing it because I don't want to die in a penthouse tonight." It was the truth, but not the whole truth. There was a thrill in her eyes, a spark of the old life she had buried under hospital linens. She missed the hunt. Suddenly, the screens turned a violet, washing red. A skull icon materialized in the center of the main display, mocking them. "Protocol Omega initiated," a synthesized voice announced from the speakers. The room vibrated with the sound of the hard drives spinning up to maximum velocity, preparing to rewrite themselves into oblivion. "It's over," one of the guards whispered, lowering his weapon. Jae-sung closed his eyes, accepting the end. He had flown too close to the sun, and now the wax was melting. But Brianna stopped typing.
She didn't panic.
She didn't scream. She simply leaned back in the chair and folded her arms. The silence that followed was louder than the alarms. "What are you doing?" Kyung-ho screamed, running back into the room, his suit jacket discarded. "Fix it. Type something." Brianna turned her chair slowly to face them. A small, dry smile played on her lips, the first time she had smiled since the hospital. "I don't need to type," she said softly. "I didn't just build a wall, gentlemen. I built a mirror." She pointed to the screen. The red skull flickered, distorted, and then shattered. The text that began to scroll wasn't deletion logs. It was download data. Massive packets of information were flooding into Jae-sung's server, not out of it. When they initiated the wipe, they had to open a full duplex channel to verify the deletion command, Brianna explained, her voice the only steady thing in a world of vertigo. "I inverted the handshake. Instead of accepting their kill command, I used their own tunnel to pull the root directory of the attacking terminal." She looked at Jae-sung, whose eyes were wide with comprehension. "You aren't losing your data, boss. You're downloading theirs. You now own the hard drive of the man who tried to kill you." The room was stunned into a cathedral-like reverence. The red warning lights faded, replaced by the soothing, steady green of a system restore. The download bar hit 100%, and a file directory popped up on the main screen: names, bank accounts, GPS coordinates, chat logs. It was the entire operational history of the rival syndicate, the Viper tongues, laid bare for the taking. The hunter had become the prey in a matter of seconds. Jae-sung stared at the screen, the realization of his victory washing over him like a cold wave, numbing the pain in his chest. He looked at Brianna, who was standing up, stretching her back, the green scrubs rumpled but her dignity immaculate. She looked tired, the adrenaline fading to reveal the exhaustion of a double shift followed by cyber warfare. She walked over to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city that was no longer burning, but waiting to be reconquered. Jae-sung stood up, ignoring the protest of his body, and walked to her. He didn't stand as a king addressing a servant. He stood as a man acknowledging an equal. "You have access to anything you want," he said, his voice low, intimate in the vastness of the room. "Money, protection, a new identity. Anything." Brianna looked at him, her reflection ghosting over the glass against the city lights. She saw the power he held, the violence he represented, but she also saw the vulnerability she had exposed. I want to go back to my shift, she said simply, though they both knew that life was gone. But first, she turned, her eyes locking with his. You're going to let me check your blood pressure. You're still my patient, and your heart rate is unacceptable. The Mafia boss, the man who had just crushed his enemies with a keystroke he'd impress, nodded slowly, submitting to the one authority in the room that actually mattered.